In retrospect, it's kind of weird that the first mainline Shin Megami Tensei game we got in the West was the third entry, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. This is because if you were to compare this one to any of the entries that came before or after, Nocturne still stands out as being this wholly original entry in this series. Longtime viewers might remember me saying that it's hard to think of any other games that are like SMT Nocturne. And yeah, 5 years later, that sentiment rings true. Nocturne's legacy has been defined by a lot of things. Its brutal difficulty, dark story, and oppressive atmosphere. Persona's edgy older brother, as it's sometimes known as. But would you believe me if I said that, despite all of that, I find Nocturne to be a rather cozy game for me? I know that might sound a bit strange considering the subject matter, but I'm serious. Nocturne is a game that I hold near and dear to me. It's one that I make time to do a playthrough of every year or so. It's slowly become one of my favorite games ever. It's a top 10 for me, maybe even 5. Which is why I find it a bit annoying that my original video on this game is as shallow as it is. Look, I get it's a cliche for YouTubers to cringe at their older stuff, but I don't know, man. When you've been doing this crap for as long as I have, there's a pretty decent chance that you'll improve somewhere along the way. And it's through gaining that experience that sometimes the urge to revisit an old project creeps its way into me. I've improved so much over the years, both in terms as a writer and as a critic. So I think it's time to give Nocturne the examination it deserves and tell you why Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne is one of, if not, the most important titles Atlus has ever produced. Buckle up, because this might be a long one. But first, let me tell you about today's sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is the most immersive and in-depth vehicle combat game you can find, available on PC, consoles, and mobile. It features over 2,500 different vehicles to pilot, ranging from tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships that span across 10 different nations and over 100 years of history, all of which have been painstakingly recreated to be as accurate as possible. Whether you're an avid history buff, or just someone looking to feel what it's like to take control of these powerful machines, War Thunder has got you covered. Thanks to the game's highly detailed graphics and realistic sound effects, you'll almost believe that you're right there on the front lines. My favorite feature has got to be the impressive damage effects. There's this X-ray view where you can see where your vehicle was hit and how that impact ultimately led to its destruction. With a worldwide player base of over 95 million players and multiple game modes to choose from, there's always something new to check out whenever you log in, and the best part is that it's absolutely free. War Thunder is available on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile. And hey, if you sign up through the links in the description, new and returning players who haven't played in 6 months receive a massive bonus pack across PC and consoles, featuring premium vehicle time, 100k silver lions, and the exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor. Once again, major thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. At the core of SMT Nocturne lies one simple question. If you had the chance to change the world, what would you want the world to change into? The story of Nocturne begins on a rather uncomfortable but memorable note. In modern-day Tokyo, a group of high school students make a day trip out of visiting their teacher at the hospital, though to say that everything exists in normalcy would be an outright lie. Lately, there have been an ongoing string of riots breaking out all over the city, eventually culminating in a massacre at the local park. Rumor has it that these events have connections to the occult, which may have a bit more validity than you think when we run into this shady guy in the basement. Not only that, but our own teacher, Miss Takao, is seemingly in on this too. Before we can get a proper explanation though, Miss Takao tells us of an incoming cataclysmic event known as the Conception. Apparently, the world has a lifespan, and once time has run its course, everything as we know it will cease to exist. But to be honest, that sounds like a load of bullshit. It was at this moment during my first playthrough when Nocturne dug its hooks deep into me, and it was sure as hell wasn't gonna let go. This game has such a striking and powerful opening. It's one of my favorites in JRPGs. You think of iconic opening sequences, and the bombing mission from Final Fantasy VII springs to mind. That one was a great example because it establishes the goals of the story while also giving you a good sample of what to expect in the gameplay, all the while feeling completely natural. While Nocturne's introduction sequence isn't as immediately exciting as something like FF7, I believe that it's just as effective in its purpose. In the first 20 minutes of the game, we meet all of the major alignment characters, get a small glimpse in the demonic forces we have in store for us, and are presented with a compelling enough mystery to see it through to the end. Why does the conception happen? What is its purpose? Who is this small child, and why did they give us demonic power? What happened to our friends? Did they survive too? The way Nocturne throws you into the thick of it, not giving you the chance to fully process what's going on, is striking. It leaves just enough breadcrumbs that you'd be hard-pressed to ignore the trail. What's funny is that SMT5 tried to copy this lightning in a bottle opening, but where that game messes up a bit is that there isn't enough to get attached to before things start falling apart. 5 feels more interested in throwing you right into the gameplay, which is fine because that exploratory level design was the game's main selling point. But if you've played that game, at least the original version, then you would know that it was in desperate need of characterization and build-up. I feel like Nocturne does an overall better job at establishing these characters and their relationships, on top of building off of them in a more compelling way. I'm sorry, this is just a case of old good, new not so good. And hey, a benefit of this quick opening is that it throws you into gameplay right away, and it's here where Shin Megami Tensei, and really every Atlus game going forward, would change forever. So, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne entered development with the goal of attracting new fans in mind. While the previous 3 games were a moderate success, at least enough to justify continue making them, Atlus had much bigger ambitions in mind, and they viewed the PS2 as the key to that success. What this means is that there's a shit ton of differences this time around. It's almost as big as a departure as Persona 3 was from its previous installments. It only makes sense considering the director behind these projects. While Nocturne wasn't Katsura Hashino's directorial debut, that honor would go to the cult classic Dreamcast game Maken X, this was the first time Hashino would be leading the charge for a traditional Megaten game. While he's mostly known for his more recent works on Catherine, Persona, and Metaphor, I would argue that his contributions to Shin Megami Tensei left a much larger impact on the franchise than people realize. Megami Tensei gameplay before Nocturne was relatively basic, however this doesn't mean that it lacked depth. Sure, these games had simple systems when you broke them down to their individual pieces, but it's how these ingredients are used where that unique Atlus flavor came from. Believe it or not, combat wasn't a priority in the classic games. Obviously, random encounters and bosses exist because, it's a game, but their purpose was a bit different compared to other RPGs at the time. SMT was unique in the fact that it costed the player resources to have extra party members alongside you. Magnetite was super cool because it asked you to prioritize your party composition based on factors relating to exploration. Since every step you take drains a resource, you need to weigh up how many demons you want to have in your active party. Do you prioritize strength and numbers, or maybe just one big beat stick could get the job done? Normally, exploration and combat are considered 2 separate game states, so Shin Megami Tensei stood out because it blurred that line. But here's the thing, these are really old games, so it's safe to say that the implementation wasn't amazing. I think the biggest issue with Magnetite in those classic games, and the reason why it was dropped for Nocturne, was because of the inherent limitations it had on the game design. There are hard caps on what you can and cannot do because the Magnetite system always has to be taken into consideration. When you design your games around one central mechanic, the moment it loses its initial impact is when players start to see the cracks in the foundation. Without Magnetite, classic SMT has some pretty lackluster combat, and I'm still baffled that it took Atlus as long as they did to add more to the foundation. Like, it was seriously 3 games of the exact same thing. This shit got old, and I'm glad that Nocturne decided to take an axe swing and start over from scratch, because what they went with, oh my god, it's so good. So, Press Turn, the combat system that turns your party members into action currency. If you exploit a weakness or land a critical hit, you only use half an icon. If your attack misses or is nullified, then you lose 2 full icons. And if the attack is reflected or absorbed, then you lose all of them. The same ruling applies to the enemy. Press turn combat, for how simple the rules are, manages to extract so much depth out of what would otherwise be a rather standard 4-party RPG. Imagine if in Pokemon, the trainer could throw hands, and that's Shin Megami Tensei. But with the introduction of press turn, a brand new layer of dynamic play has entered the equation. On-the-fly decision-making is tricky to promote in turn-based games. Due to the innate nature of the combat systems, a lot of titles reward players for thinking multiple steps ahead. Maybe you'll need a backup plan in case something goes wrong, but still, these are slower-paced games that want you to stop and really think about what you're doing. Stuff like Final Fantasy X comes to mind. That game is rad as hell because it gives you time to optimally pick your actions and even gives you real-time previews of how it'll impact the turn order. Nocturne takes a different approach. Because you can basically at any moment extend your action count for the round, Nocturne practically begs you to experiment with your kit. Find an enemy that's weak to electricity or something, and all you need is a basic version of that spell to get more turns. It encourages players to build demons with versatility in mind to help give yourselves an edge in combat. Also, there's a pass feature in this game. This is one of those unsung heroes that basically nobody talks about, but it's also simultaneously one of the most useful features in the game. I think people underestimate just how valuable being able to swap your active character actually is in these games. By passing a turn, you're essentially sacrificing half a press turn icon to take control of the next character in line. The only clause is that if you pass a turn when you already have a blinking icon, it'll just get trashed. This might seem a bit punishing, but it honestly makes a lot of sense to me. The ability to just outright swap who you're attacking with is a game changer. It can go from not being able to exploit a weakness to suddenly starting a chain reaction where you end up with twice the number of actions than before. SMT 5 would eventually remove this restriction, but the difference is that 5 was balanced with that in mind and Nocturne absolutely wasn't. In fact, it's hard to say that the entire game was even balanced around always getting a bunch of press turns, but we'll save that for later. Another positive about press turn is that it encourages you to plan your party composition around countering any potential weaknesses. How many RPGs have you played where it's entirely possible to brute force your way through obstacles even when you should be at a disadvantage? For me, it's quite a few, some even from this very company. Nocturne manages to avoid this issue due to how the press turn system functions. Nearly every demon naturally has a weakness, there's only a handful that don't. Since enemies follow the same rules that the player does, this means that if there's a hole in your formation, the game will take advantage of that. It's a horrible idea to enter a boss fight with a weakness that could be exploited, especially on hard mode. One wrong play and that's it, so you'll be better off trying to find alternatives if possible. Sometimes it might even be a good idea to bring a not-so-great demon into a fight because its elemental affinity is just what you need in that moment. I mean, that's what the pass feature is for after all. Or you know what? You could keep someone with a weakness, but then have Demi-Fiend or another demon nullify that same element. So that way, even if your party does get hit with something you're weak to, the enemy will still actually lose turns. I love shit like this. It almost feels like an unintentional exploit, but you know damn well that the devs thought about this stuff too, which is why they even bothered to throw in those passive null skills. As a foundation, press turn combat is awesome. It has all the hallmarks of a great mechanic. Simple to understand, but with rules flexible enough that they can be applied and morphed in a multitude of ways. And since Megami Tensei has that Pokemon appeal of having a seemingly never-ending roster of demons to command, you're bound to find out a new strategy with your team composition in nearly every fight. It's exhilarating and dynamic, and manages to stand side by side and even surpass some of the most recognizable battle systems in the genre. Though, for how solid this first attempt at the idea is, it's not without issues. Some of them are just growing pains, like how it takes a full icon to switch in and out demons. You know, that's just a small thing that's different. And then there are the cases like status ailments being almost entirely useless against bosses. I don't know, I just think that there should have been clear communication on that one. When you compare the combat of SMT Nocturne to any of the games that came afterwards, it might look like it's the same thing, but with less features, and yeah, I do get that to an extent. The later games took the base that Nocturne established and attempted to innovate on it, and to some people, those additions added a whole lot. But I can't quite say the same thing about myself. To me, those extra mechanics featured in games like SMT 4 and 5 don't necessarily add depth. Sure, those new additions do matter to the game design. It's hard to think of a version of 5 that doesn't have the Magatsuhi skills, but at the same time though, just because these newer games have more things doesn't necessarily mean they're better for it. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say that some of these games are worse off for it. Smirking, for example, is not a very good mechanic. Its unpredictable nature and insane stat buffs makes whoever gets it disgustingly overpowered. If you get it, then you pub stomp. If the enemy gets it, then you just fucking instantly die. 5 Magatsuhi skills are better, but they suffer from a unique problem in that the game justifies using any skill outside of the critical hit one. Sure, I can find maybe a handful that have cool applications, but 99% of the time, it's something that you have to save up and dump all at once. It creates a rather rigid playstyle and makes a good handful of bosses feel the same. Since Nocturne only has the basic framework to build battles off of, I honestly find them to be a lot more enjoyable on the whole. There's no instant win button, no special attack to pop at any given time to save myself. No, it's just me, my demons, and my skill. If I win a fight, I know it's because I earned it through good strategy and execution. And maybe just a little bit of cheese. Alright, let's get something clear real quick. A lot of people lately have been trying to rewrite history in regards to this game's difficulty. Apparently Nocturne was never a challenging game. It's actually pretty easy. Now, I don't know about you, but for years, Shin Megami Tensei, specifically Nocturne, was always touted as the RPG for the hardcore player. It was a game that was going to put some hair on your chest and truly test your skills. I think what people tend to forget when talking about a game's difficulty is the context of its release. SMT Nocturne is a 2003 PS2 RPG. It was the first mainline game in the series that we got. And yeah, it is more challenging than most games on the market at the time. Let's be real here, the people buying a game like Nocturne were probably fans of other RPGs. And the kind that were the most popular at the time honestly aren't the most difficult ones in the world. Think stuff like Pokemon, Final Fantasy, and Dragon Quest. These are games that, sure, might have a moment or two of tension, but on the whole, they're fairly beginner-friendly. Shin Megami Tensei stood out from the crowd because it expected you to use all of the tools at your disposal. You wanna know why Matador was such an infamous boss battle back in the day? It's because players weren't conditioned to play these types of games the way Nocturne wants you to. Matador is a complex enemy for such an early boss. He's got 2 unique skills, can remove debuffs from himself, and can deal a crazy amount of damage if you're not careful. Were there any other main campaign fights in popular turn-based games as infamous as this one? Really think about it. Matador is the face of Nocturne, not because he's the most challenging thing in the whole world over 20 years later, but because of what he represented at the time. Hardcore fans of the franchise like you and me might not struggle too much with a boss like Matador, but we're the outliers here. The average player is going to find Nocturne to be a bit more challenging than other games out there. Also, I know you use guides, you can't fool me. I've seen Johnny Awesome's view count. Back in my original video covering this game, I asked a few questions regarding Nocturne's difficulty. The conclusion I came to at the time was that I thought the game was more difficult than average, but it does a good enough job at preparing the player to tackle those challenges. Doesn't change the fact that Beast Eye is a stupid-ass unfair skill, but whatever. Though I did acknowledge that, at the time, I thought the game's difficulty was a bit overblown by people. However, that perspective came from someone who was playing the game on the normal difficulty. While I could just say, oh, if you find Nocturne to be a bit too easy on normal, just play it on hard. It makes the game so much better. That wouldn't exactly be true. There's a lot of differences between normal and hard, more than you might think. Those discrepancies might even be major enough for this difficulty to not be for you. Fuck, sometimes I even struggle to justify if it's for me. Think of it like this. Nocturne on normal mode is like a hike through a trail. If you don't have much experience with the activity, then there's a chance that you're gonna struggle a bit. Halfway through, you might even begin to regret the decision to participate. But if you just stick to it and try your best, by the end of the journey, you'll come out of it feeling satisfied. A tough but rewarding challenge. On the other hand, Nocturne on hard mode is like a guy waiting outside of your room with a baseball bat. Okay, Nocturne on hard mode is a bit of a weird experience. It actually does a lot of things that I appreciate. Mainly, it makes certain fights that were a bit lacking a lot more intense. The higher damage values might catch you off guard at first, but they're necessary, I feel. It makes the buff skills matter a hell of a lot more. It is what the game is known for, after all. When I'm fighting bosses and the like, hard mode is great. Nocturne's world is all about that survival of the fittest mentality, so it makes sense that these important set pieces promote that idea. I also just find the more challenging bosses fun because I've played these games more than the average person. It's nice to have something to test that skill, right? If hard mode was just that, then I would love it. But it's not just that, and I hate it. So on top of the damage formula changes, hard mode decides to make alterations to seemingly meaningless factors that ultimately end up making it a pain in the ass sometimes. Running away from battles doesn't work on hard mode. If you want certain escape, you need to make sure you're using one of your extremely limited smoke bombs, or bring out a demon with Trifuri. Enemies also tend to go first a lot more often, I feel. This is one of those anecdotal things, but I swear, ambush rates are higher in hard mode. Bonus points if the enemy ambushes you and instantly targets the main character. Nah, it's cool, I didn't want to play the game anyways. That's the kind of stuff that, yeah, is annoying, but I can put up with it. What kills my enjoyment of hard mode is how shop prices, and even just the currency is handled. Triple the prices, yep, you heard me right. In a game that's already as brutal and unforgiving as Nocturne, hard mode goes out of its way to triple the cost of everything. Standard items, compendium prices, and even the healing fountain. All of it costs 3 times as much, and oh my god is it horrible. My only assumption here is that this was done in order to try to promote a more cautious playstyle. It's pretty easy to stock up on items in normal mode, especially if you do that trick to get a bunch of Maka early on. You can pretty much buy everything in the game with that amount of cash. So yeah, hard mode making items more expensive does mean that you can't just load up on the best stuff all the time. But the problem with this though, is that it ends up being a rather short-sighted solution that ends up causing a lot more problems long term. The amount of money that you earn doesn't change in between difficulties. This means that you will reach points where you can't afford to buy every Magatama, or buy back demons that you fuse away. Okay, so you just have to be a bit more conservative with your resources and you'll be good, right? In theory, yeah, but in practice, Nocturne's item prices eventually greatly outpace the amount of cash you can get. This is a bit counterintuitive to what hard mode demands out of the player in combat. I like to fuse new demons out of the best ones I have on me, then buy the old guys back afterwards. But if I want to do that in hard mode, then I need to either spend a lot of time farming money, or sell some of the more unique reusable items to get a tiny bit more cash. At a certain point, you do unlock a rather fast way to farm Maka, but all this does is cut down on busy work that was arbitrarily added there. I think it should have been double at most. Triple is way too much, and it does impact the gameplay experience in a negative way. Like I said, hard mode is a bit of a mixed bag. The actual combat stuff I'm a huge fan of. It's just small annoyances that add up after a while that drags this experience down for me. I think there should have been a middle ground between this ultra-punishing resource management mode and the more beginner-friendly difficulty. The last thing I want to talk about in regards to the combat isn't so much with the battles themselves, rather it's the character customization, less so the demons and more so the main character. Demon fusion didn't change a whole lot outside of the introduction of the Compendium. Thankfully, fusion is just one of those skills that if you learn it in one game, you can transfer most of that knowledge to the other. Not a whole lot to explain here. A lot of people take issue with the random skill inheritance, but I personally don't find it to be too bad. Sure, sometimes it can be a bit annoying when you have a hyper-specific demon build in mind, and the game just refuses to give it to you. I know I'm one of those people that go into Fusion with an optimal build in mind, but I slowly start making some compromises when I start getting bored. Those deep in the trenches know exactly what I'm talking about. It's one of the few things I can compliment the HD remaster for. It's a nice option to be able to manually select skills, but it's not a deal breaker when the system is absent, you know? I guess I just have more patience than most. Here's a tip: if you want to break this game in half, give every single demon on your team the passive skill Bright Might or Dark Might. This makes it so that your basic attack will always land a critical hit during a full or new Kagetsuji phase. It unironically makes your auto attack one of the best ones in the game. Have a demon that can't do anything during a boss battle? If you have Dark Might, just swing at them to get an extra turn. It's pretty overkill to do this on normal mode, but on hard mode, it's kind of a good equalizer. Aw, poor baby, trying to use Beast Eye to give yourself more turns? Well, guess what, motherfucker, I can do that too. Just whatever you do not give this skill to Mother Harlot, especially if you're photosensitive. This isn't a joke, I'm being serious here. Demons are cool and all, but where Nocturne differentiates itself from the past and even future games is in how you can customize the main character. Let me just start off by saying I'm not exactly the biggest fan of the more traditional RPG equipment. To me, when the only benefit to changing your items is that your number is now higher, I find it to be rather boring. The best RPGs are the ones where equipment matters more than just stats. I think of games like Kingdom Hearts 2 and Final Fantasy X as good examples. In those games, gear tends to come with secondary bonuses that can greatly alter the way you play the game. Picking a weapon for Sora in Kingdom Hearts has a lot more factors to it outside of how it alters his base stats. Atlus has flirted with this idea a few times, mainly stuff like Persona 3 and SMT 5, but even after playing through those games quite a few times, I still think that Nocturne handles it the best. Your main piece of equipment in this game is Magatama. These demonic parasites are the source of the Demi-Fiend's powers, and they also double as the method in which you learn new skills. In previous games, the main character was kind of cheeks because they straight up didn't learn anything new. They were as basic as they could get, and it was pretty much left up to your demons and guest party members to carry the weight. Which is why the best option in those games was to just lock and load. SMT 3 broke the mold by having the Demi-Fiend actually learn new skills alongside his demons. And hey, would you look at that, the magic stat finally has some sort of purpose outside of that fuck-ass nightclub. But oops, we ran into a new problem. Magic isn't very good in this game. It's funny that, for a game that was working to expand on how players could customize the main hero and his team, that Atlus inadvertently made physical significantly better. This is one of those hotly debated topics amongst fans. This discussion is often oversimplified, because players tend to focus more so on raw numbers rather than the actual utility and cost of both builds. However, in the case of Nocturne, it's hard to deny that the game puts a much greater focus on the whole right as might idea. I don't have nearly enough time to fully get into it, but magic in Nocturne is a lot weaker than physical for the most part, at least in regards to the main character. There are a handful of legitimately good magic attacks in this game, some of which I actually opted to run in my strength build. Force Boost Tornado is just way too good to pass up, and if you decide to fully commit to magic, you can actually learn skills like Wind Cutter and Magma Axis, which are some of the strongest spells in the game. But here's the thing, aside from those select few examples, it's clear that Atlus wanted you to build the Demi-Fiend around strength. Most of the flashy, exclusive skills you can learn are tied to strength. Gaia Rage and Freikugel are considered Demi-Fiend's signature skills. Divine Shot can tear through things with ease, and the sheer amount of damage these skills can do greatly outpaces magic in most bosses, since they tend to not feature any weaknesses. You can't even get every Magatama in the game without having at least 25 points in the strength stat. By that point, you may as well just fully commit so you can take advantage of those skills. But the real kicker for me lies in two major abilities, Focus and Pierce. Focus more than doubles your damage output for your next physical attack, and it's kind of ridiculous how good that is. In the current Mega 10 combat space, both physical and magic builds get access to a charge-based skill, but this luxury doesn't exist in SMT 3. I guess the trade-off Atlus was going for was to make physical the high-risk, high-reward build, and magic the elemental coverage build, which is fine for a normal playthrough, but if you're going after a specific ending, then magic is all but useless. This is because the final boss has a natural 75% resistance to all types of attacks, with the only way around it being the Pierce passive skill. But again, because Nocturne High Key gives its physical build players advantages, Pierce only works for Fizz. The only way to beat Lucifer is to hit him where it hurts, and magic is useless in that fight outside of support skills. Magic does have its place in Nocturne though. To act like it's completely useless is outright incorrect. There are a lot of bosses in this game that have some sort of counter to physical. Some of them even outright ban the use of it due to elemental affinities. Fights like Giri Makala and Scotty come to mind when I think of this. In situations like those, it's always good to have some spell slingers on standby. I actually find that magic was a lot more reliable for me in random encounters. You gain access to party-wide attacks much earlier through the use of spells than your fists, and with the right setup, those attacks can actually be pretty devastating. I was rocking a guy with Fire Boost and Prominence, and let me just tell you that it could tear through demons effortlessly, which is something that I can't always say about my physical attackers. Magic can be pretty helpful in Nocturne. I find that having a balance of both physical and magic users is the way to go. I just don't think building the Demi-Fiend around magic is all that worth it. Nocturne's combat is pretty slick. To this day, it's still some of the most fun I have while playing turn-based games. Atlus has made a lot of great battle systems over the years. I like the demon co-ops in Strange Journey, and Persona's One More system has slowly but surely found its footing, at least in regards to the core idea, implementation notwithstanding. Press Turn is just so fun and dynamic. You can create so many different strategies just by getting clever with how you sequence your actions. It turns every round into a mini puzzle to see just how much juice you can squeeze out of those 4 icons. It also helps that Nocturne itself has good combat design. Encounters can range from simple to complex, with the boss fights against the fiends being some of my favorite parts of the game. While almost all of them are optional, I highly recommend any fan of Nocturne give them a shot if they haven't. Each one of them has a quirk that needs to be factored in. I've always complimented the 4 Horsemen for having the best use of the Beast Eye skill, since it acts as a punishment for breaking rules rather than some random turn extension. Trumpeter has this cool gimmick where every 4 turns he uses one of his signature skills. The challenge comes from keeping track of HP values and figuring out the best time to go all out. These boss fights are great. They're challenging but super rewarding to take down. It never gets old for me. Yeah, the guy known for bitching so much about re-releases considers the new content to be the best. That's gotta be worth some praise. Sure, the combat of Nocturne might be basic if you're used to all the cool flashy stuff in the new games. Maybe you're a fan of smirking, Magatsuhi skills, theurgies, and all that stuff. If you are, then yeah, the game might seem a bit bare mechanically, but the thing is, that simplicity appeals to me. It doesn't waste my time or give me these stupid, overpowered crutches. For free anyway, Dark Might really is broken. But building a team capable of demolishing any demonic threat that stands between me and my goals is something that I have to work for. That's not to say that skill doesn't exist in the later games, but it's nice to go back to a simpler time where everything genuinely felt even between the player and enemy. But here's the thing, Shin Megami Tensei has always been more than just combat. The dungeon crawling side of this metaphorical coin has often been left face down, if you catch my drift. People don't usually talk about the level designs in these games with any meaningful depth. Most of the time, it begins and ends with, "It's bad," but I don't see where these people are coming from. Throughout the years, I've noticed that there's a vocal group of Megami Tensei players that hate dungeon crawlers. Doesn't make much sense to me considering what the franchise has always been, but I guess good combat can make up for that. My hot take for the day is that the dungeons in Nocturne are good. Actually, I'm gonna go a little bit beyond that and say that they're low-key some of the best ones. Nocturne feels like the first true attempt at creating a 3D Megaten game because of how much it leans into that classic design when it comes to the dungeons, while also taking advantage of the higher graphical fidelity. While the resource management aspect has been greatly reduced, I find that the trade-off is worth it because it allows for the designers to flex their creative muscles when it came to how these areas are constructed. They start off rather simple, mostly being these straightforward romps, but slowly begin to ramp up in complexity and length. The assembly of Nihilo stands out to me as the game's first true dungeon, mostly because this is when puzzles are introduced. It's simple enough, you just flip switches every once in a while to fix the broken path, but again, much like the literal map design, the puzzles also increase in complexity, but it's never to the point where I become frustrated. I actually find it rewarding to find the solution. The Yoyogi Park dungeon is one of my favorites because of how it takes advantage of the game being fully 3D. Kabukicho Prison is super cool too. You just need to use some out-of-the-box thinking to find the solution, which is something that's missing from later entries. I feel like a lot of people shit on this dungeon specifically, solely because they missed this button here the first time around. It's not a very long dungeon once you get yourself on the right path. Nocturne has good dungeon pacing. You'll get a massive labyrinth followed by a string of shorter challenges to give yourself breathing room. Though to say that all of them are winners is a bit of a lie. I never found the tunnels to be all that interesting. They're pretty short all things considered, but that also means the main ideas introduced don't get a lot of time to simmer. Trap floors could be an interesting obstacle to avoid, but if you know what you're doing, you rarely ever have to deal with them. Also, all of the tunnels share the same aesthetics, so it just blends together in my mind. The final dungeon is also a little long in the tooth. I think in terms of raw design, it's a little basic for most of the runtime, and since it's the longest dungeon in the game, things start to wear out their welcome by the time you reach the third checkpoint. I always forget about this large sequence here just after the final save point. But these lesser quality areas aren't enough to put a dampener on the dungeon crawling as a whole. When Nocturne locks in and delivers a level that has smart design and cool gimmicks that take advantage of this being a 3D game, then it rocks. While I still believe that Strange Journey has the most compelling level design out of these games, Nocturne still features solid construction. I think the reason why people have negative associations with these dungeons is because of the game's insistence on long-term consequences. Back in the day, Atlus games were rather punishing because if you got a game over, you'd be sent right back to the title screen. A lot of people find that redoing content isn't a good punishment, and really, I think it just depends. To me anyway, Shin Megami Tensei has always built itself on the foundation of endurance tests. Nocturne isn't a challenging experience just because some of the fights are tough. It's challenging because it has well-designed encounters alongside thoughtful exploration. SMT4 would end up dialing back significantly on the dungeon crawling. In that game, exploration feels like a means to an end due to how simplistic the areas are. I can only think of maybe one or two off the top of my head that actually test the player's navigation skills. People tend to prefer the dungeons in that game, and I personally don't understand why. To me, 4's exploration is significantly less interesting because there's almost no tension. Dying doesn't mean a whole lot in those games either, since the only punishment is, what, you lose some money? Nocturne tells us that the Vortex World is cruel and unforgiving. There would be a massive disconnect if that wasn't reflected in the game itself. I don't know, I think getting upset that the difficult dungeon crawler is hard seems like a waste of energy. Like, yeah, that was the point. It was supposed to be hard. If there's one thing I think we can all agree on though, it's that Nocturne is a great looking and sounding game. Whenever I see gamers compare ugly games to PS2 graphics, I can't help but roll my eyes, since it discredits all the games that didn't allow those limitations to shackle them down. Nocturne might not be the best looking game in terms of texture quality and polygons, but it does have some amazing art direction. I've always praised SMT for its combination of the contemporary and the fantastical, and Nocturne is no exception. The Vortex World can range from this completely alien and surreal experience to traveling down the abandoned streets of Shibuya. It allows the Vortex World to convey this uncanny feeling. It's completely foreign in a lot of ways, but those splashes of the modern world we left behind provide some form of comfort. It's no coincidence that almost every major shop in the game is located at some of Tokyo's most popular locations. What I like about Nocturne's world is that you're never truly safe in this game. Every single area, no matter if it's a hub or a dungeon, features random encounters. While it is inconvenient for the player, I believe it helps sell just how dangerous this world has become. The only exception to the rule is Asakusa. This abandoned area was giving new life thanks to the mannequins, and they promote a more passive lifestyle. There are even a handful of demons that agree with this and just hang out there. Though, due to events in the story, that sliver of safety is brutally ripped away from us. It's also here where you get to play Puzzle Boy, a bad minigame made by people who don't like you. This is probably the most infamous part of the game. In order to get the Jed Magatama, you have to complete this brutally difficult puzzle minigame. I shit you not, this is probably the most challenging thing I have ever experienced in an Atlus game. To the point where it comes off as a punchline to a joke we're not in on. 20 stages, and each one of them is more difficult than the last. I'll keep it real, I've never finished this minigame without a guide. The furthest I've ever gotten without one was stage 15, and that was when I first played the game. When I saw that there was even more after what I thought was the final stage, I just threw my hands up, man. I'm not entirely sure if I agree with the idea that a block-pushing puzzle should be the hardest part of your turn-based dungeon crawler, but I digress. Nocturne's gameplay holds up phenomenally well for a game that released over 20 years ago. There's a vocal portion of gamers that find older games like this to be too outdated for their liking, and I can't help but feel as though they're missing out. Sure, SMT 3 might be lacking some of the actually good quality of life features from the newer games, but that doesn't mean that the game is outdated by any stretch. Quality of life isn't this end-all be-all objective improvement to every game, and it's certainly not always necessary. Imperfections add character, provided they don't genuinely impact the user experience without adding something of value. To me, Nocturne is a fun game to blast through thanks to its solid design and amazing mechanics. There's multiple ways to tackle different scenarios, so there's plenty of room for player expression. Though, if you've played the game a bunch of times like I have, you'll come to realize that some strategies are better than others. But as the entry that invented the modern Shin Megami Tensei gameplay formula, Nocturne knocked it out of the park. There's a reason why this game is held in such high regards by the company itself. When people talk about Nocturne, most of the time, it's in reference to the gameplay specifically. Whenever I hear discussion about the narrative of Nocturne, the first thing that people say is that it's minimalistic, which is true, sort of. There are a lot less cutscenes in this game compared to something like Final Fantasy X, which only released 2 years prior. I don't bring this up to say that Nocturne is lacking in story. I mention this because it shows that Nocturne didn't hold the same storytelling priorities as your average RPG. Nocturne's story is relatively simple, all things considered. Every world across the vast multiverse has a set lifespan, and when that time is up, the conception occurs. The destruction of the old world brings about the opportunity for great change, though it's not without a few requirements. Firstly, in order to create a new world, one has to develop a reason. Think of it as the foundation that the rules of whatever society is built on. For example, one of the earliest characters we meet is this dude named Hikawa. He believes that the original world was held back by individualism. Hikawa views mankind as brimming with potential, though our inability to unite and work as one single collective is stumping progress. Hikawa's solution to conflicting ideals is to strip everyone of what makes them unique. No free will, only do what's best for the hive mind, that sort of thing. The second catch is that a reason can only be conceived by a human. And oh, would you look at that, those sick demonic powers just so happen to lock us out of the chance. But it's not all bad though. This is where that classic SMT alignment system comes into play. This is one of those aspects where I believe the other games held it in a significantly more interesting and compelling way, at least in terms of how it's implemented into the game. The classic SMT games had a rather novel way of implementing story into gameplay. Instead of story decisions being limited solely to the endings, character alignments would determine the types of demons you could include in your party. It gave extra weight to the alignment you wanted to side with, as you had to adjust your team to fit those parameters. It adds to the idea of how difficult it can be to stay committed to your ideals. Do you have the strength to go against all odds and see your vision through to the end? Well, the only way to do that is to take advantage of what your side has to offer you in terms of gameplay. Nocturne dialed back on this significantly, to the point where none of the alignment decisions ultimately matter outside of the key ending locked ones. Unlike other games, it's very obvious what choices determine your ending. Characters tend to make a big deal about it when the option is presented to you too, so it's impossible to miss. On one hand, I appreciate Nocturne for not trying to bullshit the players and just outright offer them the decision to pick what ending they want. It makes sense within the story itself. The main character can't conceive a reason, but they can at the very least side with one that they believe in. Where things start to get a bit shaky though is in how these alignment decisions are implemented. Having only one chance to get a specific ending in a game all about hearing every side of the argument, it's pretty fucking stupid. This is because these ideologies are introduced and expanded upon in fragments, and never at the same time. The first alignment lock of the game is Chiaki's. Now, I find her reason to be unappealing to say the least. However, on a first-time playthrough, you have no idea what the other reasons are going to be. Who knows, Chiaki's world of value coming from personal strength could resonate with someone. But the problem is that if they don't fully agree with Chiaki by the time she presents that idea to you, and you don't immediately accept it, that's it. You're locked out forever. You get one chance to accept a character's ideals, with no way to redo the decision after the fact. So in this hypothetical first playthrough scenario, if I hear a reason that I'm not fully on board with yet because I want to see the other characters, then there's no way to retroactively go back and side with them, unless I still have a save file. It's like how in Persona 1, the key to getting the game's best ending is a conversation held like 2/3 of the way into the journey. There are much better and more memorable ways alignment has been implemented in SMT, both before and after. This has always stood out to me as one of the narrative's weakest aspects, at least in regards to how the player interacts with it. But when it comes to what those reasons are meant to represent, they're actually a lot more compelling to me than the standard alignments. SMT has always been known for its focus on the abstract. They're games that deal less with individuals and more so on the bigger picture of what the world should be and humanity's role within it. Classic SMT is built on the foundation of that debate. Nocturne stood out as much as it did back in the day, not just due to the reinvented gameplay experience, but because the narrative abandons what we're familiar with in favor for something fresh. Reasons stand out from alignments due to how personal they are. Alignments are binary. You're law, chaos, or neutral. No matter what, characters of those archetypes will share similarities with the others of the same alignments. Chaos characters are all about that free will, while law enjoyers value order and security. While you can find splashes of those ideas within some of these characters, it's difficult to classify any of them under that traditional umbrella with the sole exception of Chiaki. Even then, it's hard to fully agree that she is chaos because angels do eventually side with her ideals. One could view Chiaki's world as one rooted in traditional chaos, but when approached from a different angle, it can be viewed as a world that promotes self-sufficiency. The only way to survive is to rely on your own strength. Why bother living if you can't fully rely on your own wits or strength? That kind of sounds like chaos, but what would law be? Hikawa's goals of united the world don't fit that since it's not based around the worship of a higher deity. It's the outright removal of all conflict by erasing what makes people unique. Him being law doesn't really fit Hikawa's character. Throughout the story, we see that it views peoples less as individuals and more so judges them based on what capabilities they have. He's quick to discard those that have served their purpose and are no longer able to help his ideal world. To Hikawa, it doesn't matter what you end up choosing to do with your life once your purpose to the world has been fulfilled. His emotionally stunted and off-putting personality gives me the impression that he was a guy that didn't have many real connections in the normal world. The dude was part of a literal cult after all. It's safe to say that a character like Isamu wouldn't fall into any of these categories either. He's a person that comes to believe that the ideal world is one where people live in isolation from each other. Why bother putting up with the bullshit that comes with getting involved with other people? Wouldn't we be happier if we were all just completely divorced from all that? Your destiny is one that you should choose for yourself after all, so what good does having others hold you back do? Or maybe you're the kind of person that prefers just being alone. Not everyone will get along with each other. There will always be hatred and disagreements. It would be easier for everyone if they lived in their own personal bubbles, free from societal expectations and responsibility. That doesn't fit into any of the themes presented in other Shin Megami Tensei games, and I find that to be a good thing. It gives Nocturne a unique texture in regards to its story. It sometimes feels like SMT narratives fall into predictable patterns. There's only so many times you can make the standard, law, chaos, and neutral feel distinct from each other, while also keeping them within the restricted confines of their origins. It's part of the reason why I prefer the narratives of the spin-off games compared to the mainline ones. They're a lot more unique and varied because they aren't barred down by the same restrictions. There are good SMT stories, but they can feel a bit samey after a while. This is why Nocturne's different approach to multiple endings lends the game a flavor that hasn't been recaptured at all yet. It's just too unique to this game to even try to replicate. Now, in regards to the people behind these reasons, that's when things start to get a little bit less interesting. I like the characters well enough in Nocturne. However, I would be lying if I said that I didn't want to know a little more about these guys. We get basic personalities and character motivations, but beyond that, I can't really tell you anything specific regarding these characters. It's pretty clear that Nocturne wants to tell a story of how everyday people deal with the aftermath of the apocalypse, not so much how these specific characters deal with it. You're meant to see a little bit of the average person in people like Chiaki, Isamu, and Mr. Cow. It makes it easy to self-insert on those people and think to yourself, oh, I wonder what I would do in this scenario. But it doesn't exactly make them the most compelling characters. Not helping this is Nocturne's inherent desire to make the player feel isolated. We can't have a rotating set of party members like in other games because that would be in direct conflict with the theme of isolation. It's a bit of a sticky situation where the only solution is for players to adjust their mindset. Don't go into this game expecting the most fleshed out characters in the world. There's enough there to attach to, but not enough for any of the character drama to hit home for me. Like, yeah, it sucks that these friends drifted apart because of their ideals. It's a shame that the only ending where all of them are able to reunite is the one where nothing in the regular world changes. Saving that friendship comes with the cost of only delaying the inevitable, and that is a bit tragic. At the same time, though, it's not like we knew these people all too well. We only have implied history to go off of, so I don't feel all that sad when things start to crumble apart. What I like about the characters in Nocturne, though, is that what development they do have feels natural. Sure, we don't get to experience it from their point of view, but we do know what these characters are going through. They're trying to survive the same brutal Vortex World that we are. The only difference is that they don't have demonic powers to rely on. They're forced to either adapt or try to run away from it all. Chiaki sees all the violence as the natural order of the world, and if she wants to stand any chance of surviving, then she'll need to be just as fierce as any other demon. This leads her down a rabbit hole, culminating in Chiaki discarding her humanity to take on a more monstrous form. Isamu, on the other hand, begins his journey by trying his best to be reunited with his high school teacher. While this might seem like a noble goal, I always took it as Isamu being so desperate to cling onto the old world that he latched onto the idea that his teacher could somehow fix everything. It's only by experiencing what the world has become firsthand where Isamu comes to the conclusion that it's just not worth it. Why bother being a hero when, wherever he goes, he's greeted by selfish people that take advantage of those weaker than them? He's beaten and imprisoned on multiple occasions. It's only because the player was there that he even manages to survive as long as he does. I can see why that at some point, Isamu just throws his hands up and just says, I'm done. This only works because we get to experience what these characters are going through firsthand. In a way, it adds credibility to their point of view. The Vortex World is cruel and unforgiving. You need to grit your teeth and fight your way through a seemingly never-ending string of demons, each more deadly than the last. Just like the ones that are able to create a reason, the player is meant to internalize their experiences with the Vortex World and side with whatever outcome would be the best. Do we eliminate all conflict at the cost of free will? Maybe we should lean into the violence and allow individuals to carve out their own path, using their own strength. How about a world where we just don't need anyone else? Or maybe we didn't realize just how good we had it until it was out of reach. The problem, though, is that in the modern age, that's no longer the case. The version of Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne that we got in the West is actually the game's enhanced re-release known as the Maniacs version. The main difference between these two games is that Maniacs has more content, and you can select hard mode off of a new save file instead of it being tied to New Game Plus. The new content in Maniacs is pretty great, all things considered. As someone who's usually harsh on this stuff, I find that Nocturne Maniacs adds a lot of worthwhile additions that aid the experience instead of detracting from it, at least for the most part. The big selling points are the new demons, the Amala Labyrinth, and the inclusion of everyone's favorite demon hunter, Dante from the Devil May Cry series. I've always found this to be an insane pick for a guest character. The lead of an action game franchise appearing as a minor antagonist in a turn-based RPG. Such a strange idea, but somehow it ends up working out a lot better than you might expect. This is entirely because the game doesn't make a big deal about Dante's status as a video game icon. It's not like the game is constantly stopping to try to convince the audience just how cool this is. Nor is he being constantly shoved down our throats. Outside of one mandatory encounter with the character, there's only a handful of scenes with this guy. His implementation in those scenes works pretty well too. Dante was contracted by Lucifer to test the Demi-Fiend's strength. Though, true to his character, Dante eventually abandons this mission when he gets the impression that there's something else brewing underneath this job. Eventually, he decides to offer his services to the player at a discount, provided you're feeling lucky that day. Is it bad that I think Dante ranks higher for me than most new characters included in re-releases? On top of being fucking Dante from Devil May Cry, it never feels like he overshadows the main story. It's not like Alex from Strange Journey, where the entire narrative is warped to make him the most important figure in the world. I would be singing a different tune if the new ending involved Dante in any meaningful way outside of being a character you can use on your team. This is what I call tasteful fan service. Anyway, the fiends in the Amala Labyrinth are the source of the game's new content. While it is really good, high-quality stuff, where Nocturne stumbles a bit is that almost all of it is tied to the game's new ending. If you want to beat all of the bosses and clear out every dungeon, you're going to be locked into the ending associated with that. This is because if you want to fight Lucifer and experience every bit of gameplay Nocturne has, then you need to finish the Amala Labyrinth, something that, upon completion, locks you into the new ending. Having gameplay content being tied exclusively to the new ending makes it so that first-time players are more likely going to ignore the original reasons. While you can still side with any character you want, the true demon ending takes priority over all of it. Sure, you can always make it to the bottom of the Amala Labyrinth and then turn around before meeting Lucifer, but no normal human is going to do that, especially after defeating a boss like Metatron. I made it to the bottom of this place, I want to see what's down there. Whenever I see people play Nocturne for the first time, almost none of them ever go for any of the vanilla endings. In fact, I myself only ever get the true demon ending because it has the most amount of content. I like fighting stuff in this game's combat system. It just feels good to really dig my fist in some demon's face, what can I say? So the idea that I'd be missing out on some of the best bosses in the franchise if I didn't finish the Amala Labyrinth encouraged me to go for the new ending. I find this to be a big flaw with this version of the game, since it fundamentally alters how players treat the reason system. What's the point in reflection and interpretation when ultimately, it doesn't matter thanks to the new content? I will say though, the actual ending in question is pretty cool. If the original Nocturne was about the player needing to side with the reason they found to be the most beneficial, then Nocturne Maniacs presents us with the question, what if the cycle of creation could be put to an end? Going through the Amala Labyrinth helps paint us a better picture of how this process works, and what we would need to do to take control of our own destiny. What I like about this ending is that it's one of the few times in the game where the player has control over an outcome. In the vanilla game, it was about making the best of what you have, but now we have the option to outright refuse to participate in the cycle of life and death, tearing down the foundations and pursuing a goal of our own will, not one of an uncaring god. It might not be a very good idea, but it's one of the few outcomes that relies on the player's ideals. Sure, it's a bit edgy, but come on, you're playing Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. You probably live for this sort of stuff. Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne is one of the most important games Atlus has ever made. It might not be the most popular, sure. I doubt any random on the street would recognize the Demi-Fiend compared to Joker. But that doesn't mean Nocturne's legacy is one that should be forgotten. Without Nocturne, Mega 10 as a whole would be pretty different. What Katsura Hashino and the people over at Team Maniacs managed to accomplish is incredible. A true reinvention of a cult classic franchise. It pays respects to the games that came before it, but at no point does it ever feel like Nocturne is just writing off the successes of those classic entries. It's not often when a franchise comeback is done with this level of care, and this was all the way back in the PS2 era. Sure, Mega 10 was trucking along with spin-offs and the odd re-release back then, but for being the big number 3, the next step in this franchise's legacy after nearly a decade of absence is nothing short of incredible. Funny that the same director would go on and do this a second time with Persona. Nocturne is one of those games where, if I wanted to, I could talk about it for hours, go into a bunch of unnecessary detail and over-explain shit. It's a game that means a lot to me. It might have some annoying parts about it, maybe the story isn't as amazing as it could have been, but even with those lesser parts considered, Nocturne has always just been a fun game for me to blast through. I try to play through this game once every few years. It's short enough that it doesn't overstay its welcome, but long enough for me to fully immerse myself in the excellent world design and art direction. The combat mechanics are rich and full of opportunities for on-the-fly decision-making. It's some of the best turn-based combat you can find, because it leans into what makes strategizing and team building so fun. It's a great game through and through, and its legacy has gone on to define what Shin Megami Tensei is. There's a reason why Demi-Fiend is the face of this franchise, and why even now, we get callbacks and references. Maybe you could argue that the game is getting a little too much special treatment, and I agree, but it's not without reason. It all comes back to what I said all those years ago. It's hard to think of many other games that are like Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. Once again, thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. The game is available for free right now on PC, consoles, and mobile. And again, if you're a new player or someone who hasn't been in the game for at least 6 months, there's a limited time bonus pack available on consoles and PC, which includes a bunch of awesome goodies, such as premium vehicles and a ton of in-game rewards. Just click the links in the description to get started, and I'll see you on the battlefield.